Welcome to Form 2441, Child and Dependent Care Expenses. This form gives you an opportunity to be able to take a tax credit based on what you spent for daycare or dependent care if you have a sick parent or family member at home. So even if you bring someone in to your house to babysit your child, if you pay them, you have an opportunity to get a credit for part of that expense. Okay, let's walk through the form. First thing is on the start, you need to put your name as shown on your return. And usually that's always going to be the primary taxpayer. So if you're married, whoever you put first on the 1040 on the front page would go here along with their social security number. Part 1 is really important. You need to report who you paid for the care. And the reason is because the IRS will go back to that person or business and make sure they're claiming the income that you paid them. So you have to include their identifying number, whether it's a social security number for an individual or an employee identification number if it's a business, and then how much you paid them. In this next section, did you receive dependent care benefits? This has to do with if your employer withheld pre-tax dollars to help you pay for your dependent care. We aren't going to be looking at this today, but if you did, then you'll complete Part 3 on the back. If you didn't, all you have to do is complete Part 2, which is what we're going to look at today. So many people that have children incur some sort of child care expense, and that's what we're going to be exploring. Part 2 then discusses your children or your dependents. So in here I've entered 2 dependents. Say you have a daughter and a son. Again, you have to put their social security number and then how much you paid. If you look at the instructions down here below, it'll say do not enter more than $3,000 for one qualifying person. So I may have spent much more than $3,000 on Sarah's daycare, but I can only enter up to $3,000. And then it says or $6,000 for 2 or more persons. So if I had 3 children and I actually incurred $11,000 in childcare, I can only have a total of $6,000 that I'm able to actually claim for this form. Okay, so what I've done is I've put in my maximum to get a total of $6,000. And then what this form does is it compares your earned income, we'll say it was $25,000, and your spouse's earned income, we'll say that was $27,000. And it compares what you spent to your earned income, like your wages. So not any interest or dividends or things like that. Then what it says is take the smallest of lines 3, 4, or 5. So when I'm comparing, what I'm doing then is I'm looking at these 3 numbers and I'm going to only be able to take the smallest. And what this does, it ensures that people are only getting the credit if they actually work, if they have earned income. If you spent $6,000 in daycare expenses and your earned income was only $1,000, chances are you're probably at home a lot of times and you didn't need to spend quite that much. So the IRS uses your earned income as a threshold to determine if you should qualify for your entire expense or not. Okay, so if we look at line 6 here and we plug in the amount, the smallest amount here would be the $6,000. There's enough earned income here where you can take the full expense, the $6,000. Then on line 7, once again, here's the AGI. Enter the amount from 1040 line 38, and then it also gives you instructions for 1040A. Notice that you can use this form if you have a 1040A or a 1040, just not a 1040EZ. So the reason we have AGI in here, adjusted gross income, is because we want to know what percent we can take as a credit based on our adjusted gross income. That's where this table comes into play. So if line 7 is over a certain amount but not over another amount, we get a certain percent that we can take of our credit. So let's look at the $54,000. Where does that fall? That falls down here. Our income is over $43,000 or adjusted gross income, and it says no limit. So it doesn't matter how much you make. But if you make 43 or over, whatever it is, you automatically will get a 20% credit. So what we do here then is we put in our 0.20, and then if we move on to line 9, it says multiply line 6 by the decimal amount on line 8. So we would take 6,000 times 20%, and that will give us our credit. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that unlike some of the educational credits or child tax credits, this is a non-refundable credit, which means that if you don't have the tax to cover that $1,200, you don't automatically get $1,200 back. And that's where this tax liability limit comes into play, line 10 here. It says enter the amount from the credit limit worksheet. If you look in the instructions and you look at the credit limit worksheet, it will have you enter in your federal tax liability. And as long as your federal tax liability is more than $1,200, so let's say in this case I owe $2,500, then it says credit for child and dependent care expenses. Enter the smaller of line 9 or 10. So I would actually get my full credit of $1,200. However, if I didn't owe any taxes, if for example I owed 0, then down here I would only be able to claim 0 credits. So your credit is first limited to a percent based on your adjusted gross income, and then it's limited to how much tax you owe. Okay, we had talked about part 3, dependent care benefits. This is just the second page, and you can walk through it if your employer takes part in a dependent assistance program for you, or you withhold pre-tax dollars for dependent care expenses. But again, we aren't going to look at this page here today. We are just focusing on page 1 of the 2441, and that is what you will use to fill out when you are doing your 1040 in the next lesson.